Alright, so welcome to the second video on the chapter on resources and development for the class 10th of the CBSE board. So in this video, we are going to look at development of resources. Now, we established that resources are vital for human survival as well as for maintaining the quality of life. And it was believed that resources are free gifts of nature. And because of this, human beings have used them indiscriminately, and it has led to several major problems. One of them is known as the depletion of resources for satisfying the greed, not the need, but the greed of a few individuals. And secondly, is the accumulation of resources in just a few hands, which in turn then divided the society into two segments, that is the one who have access to all the resources and the have nots, or you can also say rich and poor are the another names. Now just let's do a mental activity, right? Imagine that if the oil supply gets exhausted one day, think about how would it affect your lifestyle. What would it do to the way you travel, to the kind of access that you have to the other things? What impact will there on transportation, for example? Just think about it. Similarly, you can think about what happens if electricity disappears one day. Would you be able to see the video that you are seeing right now? Would you be able to use your mobile phone? Okay. The second thing you could do is plan a survey in your colony or village or your society to just understand what is people's attitudes towards recycling of domestic and agricultural waste. Now this is a big problem. You just need to google about it and see how big this is an issue. So you might want to think about what do people think about resources they use. What is their view on the waste that is generated, and what about the utilization of it, and then look at all your results. Now so yes, we were talking about the problems that the indiscriminate use of resources had led. So we talked about depletion of resources, we talked about accumulation, and then the third problem is also the indiscriminate exploitation of resources. It has led to global ecological crisis such as global warming, ozone layer depletion, and environmental pollution. Now this year, for example, global warming has really caused the places which were not generally cold to become heated up. There are spot rains and there are floods in areas where you couldn't just have thought of having floods. These are all indications of how the resources that are being used indiscriminately lead to this global ecological crisis. It's not just about the one particular country or one particular region where resources are used indiscriminately. So, an equitable distribution of resources is becoming essential for a sustained quality of life, right? Sustained is the key word. We need to be able to sustain a good quality of life, not just for this generation, but for future generations as well. And this is also going to be important for global peace. If one country doesn't have resources, obviously it is going to create issues at the level of peace. One nation may not may have to go at war with another nation to get access to the resources, as it is happening in many regions in the world right now. So if the present trend of resource depletion by a few individuals and countries continues, the future of this beautiful planet earth is in danger. So resource planning is essential for sustainable existence of all forms of life, not just human beings. We all coexist with each and every form of life on this planet earth. So sustainable existence is a component of sustainable development. Now here we have this new phrase called sustainable development. What is it? So sustainable economic development means development that should take place without damaging the environment, and development in the present should not compromise with the needs of the future generations. We all have to remember that we are just guests on this planet earth, and we have to use the things responsibly. We have to use the resources responsibly so that the future generations do not have to live in a difficult position. Now let us look at this snippet about the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit that happened in 1992, which was about 22 years ago from the time we are making this video. So in the June of 1992, more than 100 heads of states met in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil for the first International Earth Summit. This summit was convened for addressing urgent problems of the environmental protection and socio-economic development at the global level. The assembled leaders signed the Declaration on Global Climatic Change and Biological Diversity. The Rio Convention endorsed the Global Forest Principles and adopted Agenda 21 for achieving sustainable development in the 21st century. So, what is this Agenda 21? So, Agenda 21 is the declaration that is signed by the world leaders in 1992 at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. So, it's called UNCED. So, this took place in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It aims at achieving a global sustainable development. It is an agenda to combat environmental damage, poverty, disease through global cooperation and common interests, mutual needs, and shared responsibilities. So, you can see how people are trying to collaborate at the world level to achieve global sustainable development. Now, one of the major objective of the Agenda 21 is that every local government should draw its own local Agenda 21. Now, I would encourage you that this conference happened 20 years ago. Please do have a look at what is the status of this now. I mean, in this world of Google and the internet, you should be easily able to understand what happens. Is this United Nations conference on environment and development still ongoing, and what are the latest issues that they are looking at as of today. So now let us carry on to the next topic of resource planning. So planning is simply a strategy that has been accepted for the judicious use of resources. And by the way, planning happens in all organizations. Here we are using this term for planning of the resources. Now planning has importance, a lot of importance in a country like India, which has enormous diversity in the availability of resources. The planning is also important so that you can utilize your resources properly and efficiently. So there are regions which are rich in certain types of resources but are deficient in some other. Then there are some regions which can be considered self sufficient in terms of the availability of the resources, and then there are some regions which have acute shortage of some vital resources. So if you were to look at examples of all this diversity, the states of Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh are rich in minerals and coal deposits, whereas Arunachal Pradesh has an abundance of water resources but lacks in infrastructural development. Now, on the other hand, the state of Rajasthan is very well endowed with solar and wind energy, but it lacks significantly in water resources. Then, if you go to the extreme temperatures like the cold desert of Ladakh, it's quite isolated from the rest of the country. It is very rich in cultural heritage, but it is deficient in water, infrastructure, and some vital minerals. So, you can see that because of all this diversity in the availability of resources, it is important that a balanced resource planning at the national, state, as well as the regional and local levels should take place. Now, let us look at what is the approach to resource planning in India. So, resource planning is not simple. If you can think, you have to think about a country that is 1.4 billion peoples and so many states. How are you going to plan it? So, it is very, very complex process. What does it involve? It involves the identification and the inventory of resources across the regions in the country, which kind of involves surveying, mapping, and the qualitative and quantitative estimation of the measurement of resources. The number two is evolving a planning structure endowed with appropriate technology, skill, and institutional setup for implementing resource development plans. And third, matching the resource development plans with the overall national development plans. So, India has made very concerted efforts for achieving the goals of resource planning right from the first 5 year plan that was launched after independence. The availability of resources is a necessary condition for the development of any region, but mere availability of resources in the absence of corresponding changes in technology and institutions may hinder development. So, remember the triangle that we talked about, right? The humans at the center, you need the institutions, you need the resources, and you also need the technology. So just resources is not enough, you also need to look at the institutions and the technology. So there are many regions in our country that are rich in the resources, but these are included in economically backwards region. So you have very rich resources but they are economically backward because they either are missing the technology to extract those resources, or there may not be the right institutions. So on the contrary, there are some regions which have a poor resource base, but they are economically developed. Why? Because they have focused on making the best use of technology and the institutions to deliver the economic development. So the question for you is, can you actually name some resource rich but economically backward regions and some resource poor but economically developed regions, and try to think about why, what really created such a situation. Now, the history of colonization reveals that rich resources in the colonies were the main attraction for foreign invaders. So you can think about it. The whole idea behind colonization was had a lot to do with the resources in the colonies. It was primarily the higher level of technological development of the colonizing countries that helped them exploit the resources of the other regions and establish their supremacy over the colonies, right? So they provided the colonies, they provided the technology. The invading countries were able to utilize the technologies to extract resources in other regions. So therefore resources can contribute to development only when they are accompanied by appropriate technological development and the institutional changes. So this is a key idea, that you need to come back at that triangle which we discussed in the first video. So India in development in general and resource development in particular does not only involve the availability of resources but also technologically quality of human resources and the historical experiences of the people. Now let us look at the concept of what do we mean by the conservation of resources. So resources are vital for any developmental activity, but irrational consumption and overutilization of resources may lead to socio-economic and environmental problems. To overcome these problems, resource conservation at various levels is important. This has been the main concern of the leaders and thinkers in the past. For example, Gandhiji was very apt in voicing his concern about resource conservation in these words: there is enough for everybody's need, but not for anybody's greed, which is very true. He placed the greedy and the selfish individuals and exploitative nature of modern technology as the root cause of the resource depletion at the global level. Do you agree with it? He was against mass production and wanted to replace it with production by the masses. Okay. Now, here is an interesting snippet. At the international level, the Club of Rome advocated resource conservation for the first time in a more systematic way in 1968. So this idea of resource conservation, right, as such, was first introduced in 1968. Then in 1974, the Gandhian philosophy was once again presented by Shoemaker in his book Small is Beautiful. The seminal contribution with respect to resource conservation at the global level was made by the Brundtland Commission report in 1987. This report introduced the concept of sustainable development. So that's where this whole term comes in from, this report in 1987. And this report advocated it as a means of resource conservation, which was then subsequently published in a book entitled Our Common Future. Another significant contribution was made at the Earth Summit in Brazil. So you can say it started from 1968, then 1974, 1987, as well as 1992. These are the key points. Now, of course, when this textbook is written, it may not have been updated. Can you see what has happened on the theme of sustainable development in the last 20 years? That is from 1992 to 2022. So this was all about the sustainable development and the resource utilization. In the next video, we will look at the land resources.